right. Welcome everybody to the Vet Safety Workshop. The time is 7 minutes past 1 o'clock. We have presentation from Sally. I'm just gonna briefly introduce her, and we're gonna give her about 25 minutes, she said. And then after that, we're gonna have a session for a discussion. So Sally Gaule is a senior lecturer in the School of Architecture and Planning at the University of the Witwatersrand. She's a practicing photographer and curator. Her research has focused on South African photography and photography of architecture. The paper was circulated, so I'm gonna hand over to Sally to make her presentation.
Thank you very much. I'd firstly just like to dedicate this paper to the memory of Phil Bonner, who taught me such a lot. And this paper, and it's very nice to see so many friends here. Thank you very much for coming. This paper arose out of an exhibition that I curated of William's work at the Apartheid Museum in 2018. And over the last couple of years, I've been looking very much more closely at his work so that I could write an academic paper about it, which has been accepted for publication by Social Dynamics, and it should be appearing in the next few months. But this is a shortened version of that paper. William Matlala is a South African photographer who has depicted the lives of workers for the past 30 years. His work forms a vital record of that which passed below the threshold of the noticed. He focuses on factory and industrial workers and protest action that arose during the trade union movement in South Africa. One of his aims was to concentrate on the gaps and silences that he felt was missing in such photographs. Another was the role of the everyday, and more essentially, the portrayal of the dignity of work. And lastly, the partly overlooked position played by women in the struggles for workers' rights. Drawing on Tina Kant's theories of listening to images, the effective dimension of sound and quietness in photographic images gave further depth to my analysis. William's own life and personal biography and the historical circumstances in which he worked is crucial to the narratives that his photographs describe. His archives preserve a wealth of material about life and work in South Africa. Moreover, my analysis of his images shows that he has had a sustained relationship with his subjects over decades. In short, he depicts people as people, assembled at the intersection of economic imperatives that hint at the interior lives and daily routines that he and his subjects face. His archives comprise a socio-economic record of his own historical moment. He has recorded the beginnings and early evolution of a worker movement that was to culminate in 1994. His photographs of the growing number of strikes and gains made by the trade union movement are mute evidence of a mass worker movement that emerged from the 1970s. His photographs demonstrate vibrant protest action largely through the lens of work and workers that show a dimension of the lives of ordinary people prior to and during the South African transition to democracy. Many African workers' lives were characterized in the 80s and 90s with moves between wage labor and rural homesteads, where they were needed for small-scale crop growing. Until then, past laws and influx control had kept Africans penned to rural areas until their repeal in 1986 that caused racial barriers to come tumbling down. It was then that the state began to accept in theory that industrial and urban citizenship should be premised on the same inclusive principle. William Matlala's own life overlapped with these events. He sought work in Johannesburg in the late 1970s, at a time when the South African economy was shifting from mining to manufacturing. In the first image, which you should be able to see, the figures are composed against the backdrop of their work environment. It was taken just prior to the first democratic elections and represents an emblematic moment in the country's workers' history. For all the beauty of the photograph, its sharp detail and uniform exposure, its stillness belies the reality of what was occurring in South Africa at the time. The workers' overalls are tattered and ragged, and the dust of bone meal can be seen on their faces. Factory equipment appears haphazardly arranged in the space behind them. The violence running up to the 1994 election was at its worst. South Africa was at war with itself, and the jumbled chaos of machinery appears dilapidated and makeshift, evoking the disarray of South Africa itself. But the image also stands as a metaphor for the economic stresses and precariousness of workers' lives that is registered in their unfathomable facial expressions. What is more, supplies seem scant. Bags are only half filled, suggestive of scarce resources that characterize their lives and echo the economic hardships that sanctions wrought on the country at that time. The subjects look out at the photographer and us, the viewer, at their uncertain future. In some ways, the image is at variance with the political turmoil of the time, since it betokens silence and stillness, not just literally, but metaphorically too. Unable to protest against poor working conditions and unfair labor practices, the silence of the image might also signify their inaudible voices. One objective of this paper was to examine what inspired William to conceive of these poignant images at this stage of South Africa's political transition. What was his connection to the workers whose facial expressions and poses he depicts? What did he want to tell the viewer? Perhaps his early years might provide some clues. He was born in Ditabaneng, a small village 40 kilometers south of Polokwane. Growing up there, he helped his mother plant crops and plow fields, but once the crops were harvested, food was short, and making ends meet was a constant struggle. At the age of 16, he left the village and sought work in Johannesburg. When he arrived in Katlehong in 1973, he took up residence in Mnisi Hospital. His first job was at Pretoria Bottling Factory, which was horrible. And he describes it as a life of hell, a company of guys who really wanted you to work but didn't like you as a person. On this income, he was able to live and remit funds home to his mother, but after 8 months, he was fired and spent 3 years unemployed, drifting from one temporary job to another in order to survive. In 1976, he gained work underground at Grootvlei gold mine in Springs, but left only a few months. And the effect of this was so traumatic that William prefers not to talk about it. In 1980, he returned to Johannesburg, walking from factory to factory in Germiston, searching for employment, which he eventually found at Trimpak, a factory packaging saucers. He began by loading the trucks, but quickly learned how to become a machine operator. And he recalled that it was a very interesting job and he loved it. Although the work was temporary and the company never registered him as an employee, he remained there for 7 years. It was during this time that Matlala found a camera belonging to his father and began taking photographs of his co-workers in the factory who loved his work. This provided extra income for William. At the factory, Trimpak, where he worked, a colleague with some knowledge of photography gave William technical guidance and advice on composition and framing, encouraging him to apply for a correspondence course at Pretoria School of Photography. Later on, he also attended Photo Teach, a photography school established by Michael Goldblatt and his wife Adele Gordon, and it was there that he gained practical and technical experience in black and white photography. This experience, he said, was eye-opening. Photography and political events have had a long history in South African photography, and political events took precedence over quotidian concerns. With this in mind, William sought to portray the experiences of workers and everyday life and working conditions. And his photographs span from the 1980s to the present, focusing on the daily struggles and the many protests that have occurred over the decades. Of significance in this body of work is the tedium of repetitive work, the daily commute, difficult negotiations, and disproportionate powers between worker and employer, as well as industrial accidents and the ongoing struggle to eke out a living. Moreover, the inclusion of images of women, their presence in the workplace and on the factory floor, and in protest action stressed an engagement with women's histories and their collective action in claiming a part in the struggle for workers' rights. In looking back at his archive, we see an extraordinary narrative of the history of work and workers in South Africa, of hard-won battles for decent wages, job security, and fair working conditions. In paying attention to the contours of daily life, Matlala's photographs give true voice to workers' lives that have been overlooked and unacknowledged. In focusing on this, Matlala justly gives expression to the value and dignity of work, and by implication its opposite, unemployment. Few photographers have focused on this aspect of South Africa's transition, and the growing number of strikes and stayaways that Matlala documented show an important record of the gains made by the trade union movement and the mass worker movement that began in the 1980s. Matlala's image of an empty platform at Katlehong Station is mute testimony to one of the stairways, and an empty coach powerfully conveys a sense of the coordinated efforts instigated by the trade union movement. During apartheid, the law did not allow Africans to do skilled work, and they were forced into the lowest, least satisfying paying jobs. Indeed, the idea of being fulfilled by meaningful work was a remote concept to African workers, and probably still is in many instances. They had few rights and benefits and had to accept the authority of a white manager without question. Stephen Friedman, former trade unionist and economist, writes. But by 1985, the trade unions were coming of age and began to wield power in many factories, although their growth was slow, halting, and plagued by setbacks. But what was remarkable was the emerging union's ability to creatively overcome obstacles and push further in the building of worker power. The very fact of getting employers to talk to workers and discuss grievances was a hard-won battle. Workers sought higher pay, better working conditions, and the right of grassroots Black leaders to influence white decision-making, something Stephen Friedman observes was unique in South Africa at the time. These were the signs that the workers were winning control over their lives. And this example, this photograph is telling for the placard, fight low wages and OK's Bars Cup attitude emblazoned in the center that tacitly suggests some of the more invisible underlying forces that workers were facing. Yet the workers' boldness in standing in front of the shop window itself seems to indicate an act of defiance which previously would have been quite unthinkable. But Matlala's archive does not simply illustrate events of this period. Rather, his images offer a deeper understanding of the intimate inner experiences of urbanizing Africans at this time. Moreover, he himself was active in the civics and adhered to calls to stairways that he monitored. His archive is thus conceived as both intimate and personal and public, and gives expression to the everyday concerns and experiences of his compatriots. Since he himself was a shop steward, he was able to communicate his own subtle but distinctive kinship with the subjects in his photographs. In some images, Matlala expresses the voice of the workers. And in others, he shows how fraught negotiations were. Although workers were gaining a voice, it is often their silence that speaks more loudly, which is quite telling, I think, in the photograph on the left. And silence can mean many things, a necessary means of survival, of resistance to drawing attention to oneself, a refusal to complain as a way of obviating reprisals, and the denial of the right to vote. Alternatively, silence may not be a choice, but rather a force exerted by political ideology, one which states that you must know your place. Silence might also be contrasted to the ear-splitting noise of industry that is evident in some of William's other photographs. In listening to images, Tina Kampt invites us not just to look at images, but to listen to quiet photographs, requiring us to perceive of images in a counterintuitive manner and to engage in a practice of looking beyond what we can see, and by attuning our senses to other effective frequencies through which the photographs register. Her practice is instructive and was instructive to me in reading William's photographs. The quietness of the men in these photographs is at variance with the sounds of everyday life that ask the viewer to consider its meaning in this context. Is it restraint, a silent protest, exasperation, ambivalence and uncertainty, or unformed thoughts yet to be articulated? Photographs are inherently ambiguous and fragmentary and prevent us from knowing fully and with certainty what is being conveyed. This is part of their allure and leaves them open to other interpretations. We need to be detectives. We need to piece the information together because we simply cannot know what is going on in a person's face. Consequently, this points to one of the limitations of the medium, of what the photograph cannot or will not say. Allied to silence is its corollary, invisibility. Thus, these images speak of the multiple meanings that quietness in our society augurs, reflecting and refracting some of the complexities of it that Matlala records in his archive of protest. In this image, a man in tattered overalls speaks at a lunchtime meeting. Despite his frayed clothing, or perhaps because of it, we are made aware of his unpretentiousness, his direct stance, and his self-possessed dignity. He speaks with gestures to reinforce his point, and his lined forehead betokens concentration and seriousness. This image is the very essence of a man with something to say, of a voice being listened to and heard. For Matlala, the photograph of a man speaking at a lunchtime trade union meeting was a bold attempt to understand and articulate the growing voice of workers in the workplace, who up until then had been largely voiceless and invisible to management. The season is winter. We can see that by his jersey underneath his dust jacket. The biting cold of winter and the harsh light of the high felt winter sun indicates that spring might be some way off. Thus, this image might also be viewed as a symbol of the erratic and hard-won gains that I referred to earlier, and the ways in which these were also riven by setbacks and false starts, just as the false starts of spring are wont to revert suddenly back to winter. Moreover, in this photograph, Matlala articulates an understanding and interpretation of his own historical moment, of the powers that be that continued to silence African voices, and a growing determination and newfound confidence that this man exhibits. In the next image, Clocking Out, the principle of time in the workplace and the form of the work shift is foregrounded. Beyond this frame, however, is the anxiety workers might experience clocking in and clocking out, and the necessity to adhere to a strict time schedule. Time here is the preserve of the master manager who monitors it through mechanical means, attempting to discipline and control the workforce and also to maintain as efficient and productive a workforce as possible. Like Matlala's other photograph of citrus workers, work time is a theme within his oeuvre, and one which would have an impact of his own experiences growing up in a small village. Cycles of life and work in rural areas are prescribed by the seasons, community and festivals that mark not only the passage of time, but of productivity itself. Fallow seasons are followed by cultivation, harvesting, and threshing. City life is at variance with this. Thus, the workplace in rural areas is much more integrated with everyday life and family life. Although Matlala's image of the woman worker clocking out might convey a sense of the strict separation of work time, a rupture exists here too, as most of us know. For this woman, as for most working women and men, a raft of chores such as cooking, ironing, washing, cleaning, and sweeping may await her at home. This we recognize as the complexity of life beyond the workplace that lies in the elusive, prosaic, and seemingly unremarkable space of the everyday. The allure in these two images, the allure of the everyday is made manifest. The women are smartly dressed, conveying a drama of aspiration. Their dignified and stylish attire denotes self-respect and a measure of economic success and agency. Their self-possessed stance suggests a determination to create an impression. Within the urban context of the street, they register their presence as city people, urban, modern, poised. Yet what could be more banal than a daily commute to work? These photographs thereby assert and make visible that which may have passed below the threshold of the noticed. Few photographs such as this one exist in the record of the apartheid archive. It is only with a certain distance from that period that we as viewers might begin to recognize the way in which Matlala constructed images in response to the everyday and the ordinary during this time. Viewing this photograph decades after the end of apartheid, our attention is drawn to the significant but easily overlooked moment in the process of the changing face of urbanizing Africans. The Urban Areas Act of 1923 that ruled that Africans were temporary sojourners of the city was not only repealed in 1986, a year after Matlala made this photograph. Not only does he offer a glimpse of their self-assured presence in the city, but also of the growing trend of urbanization and the right to the city, which the women claim as a normative event. In a way, Matlala's images point to the amalgamation of the everyday and the political, suggesting, as Stephen Johnson puts it, that the everyday also contains a political tenor. Commitment to the everyday can indicate a desire to give voice to those silenced by dominant discourses and ideologies. Although the everyday might be associated with the small side of life, the anodyne, the unremarkable, Matlala in his photographs pairs the prosaic and the political, and thus offers a dimension of the complete worker, the title of his exhibition at the Apartheid Museum in 2018. So in conclusion, in this paper, I have attempted to examine a small selection of photographs that Matlala has taken over the last 30 years. Rather than describing the scope of his vast range stored in his own personal archives, or trying to analyze the development of his photographic practice and documentation, I have focused on the themes of work and leisure, sound and silence, and everyday struggles and triumphs that his images speak to. By eschewing spectacular moments of apartheid and the violence in the transition to post-apartheid, William has preserved aspects of everyday life which might have been forgotten, dismissed, and overlooked. He has assembled a reservoir of historical documents that not only tell us something about the past, but can ask us to consider our relationship to that past. Thus, they suggest some of the complexities of archival records, of the omissions, assemblies, and hierarchies and incongruities within the photographic record itself, of changing worlds and the historical conditions that have shaped labor and labor relations in South Africa from the apartheid to the post-apartheid period. William has had a remarkable degree of insider access, which sets his images apart from more prominent official records of the era. He puts the birth of the modern trade union movement into personal context. Through a twin lens of hindsight and continuity, he strikes a particularly poignant chord with the present realities of city life and factory life. His photographs form an historical record, not from a top-down endeavor seen from the point of view of elite outsiders, but rather in the tradition of social history and its counterpart of photography from below. Thank you. I can't hear anything.
Thanks very much, Sally. George Morgan here, I'm back. I think my colleague who is chairing the session seems to have dropped out, so I'm just stepping in.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we're going to then, I'm sure he'll be joining us at any point, rejoining us. Thank you for that overview of your paper. We're then going to proceed to the next part of the seminar, which is when we invite the audience to join us in the conversation. And it's really wonderful to see that William is also present in this audience in the seminar today. So it'd be wonderful to hear his reflections on your paper. So if you have any quick replies, any comments you wish to make, you can raise your hand. I think we all know familiar how to use that feature now. Or you can also make a comment in the chat section, and we'll be able to find you there. So I'm just having a look to see if there are any comments coming in. I suppose while we're waiting for comments to come in, just a quick question to you, Sally. If you could speak to you made and emphasized a point about the incredible access that William had in photographing, in his photographing. Can you just speak to how he was able to get this access?
I can. I think William would probably be better at answering that, but William worked, on a factory floor, and he would take his camera to work with him. And so a lot of the workers knew him, and they knew him both as a photographer and as a factory worker. So he had a personal rapport with his subjects, And I think that that sets his images apart in terms of the kind of intimacy that is displayed in a lot of the pictures. There's a sense that people's are not as guarded as they might be if a photographer just parachutes into a factory and starts taking pictures. But maybe William would like to respond to that too.
Okay, cool. Sorry, guys, my internet keeps dropping me on and off, but I'm back. Sorry about that. And thanks for Sally for a fascinating paper and the fascinating images. I see Prof. Noor's has his hand up. I'm trying to see if there's anyone else. So over to you, Prof. Noor, and then we'll come back.
Thanks, Tokelo. I'm pausing because both Sally and Jogu asked whether William wanted to say anything. So I don't know whether William wants to come in at this point, and I'll wait if William wants to come in.
Dr. Matlala, do you want to have a reflection on Sally's interesting, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Tokelo. So thank you very much. And I first have to say thanks to Kelly. Sally for, I think it's quite good paper, but unfortunately I haven't seen it before so that I can have much detail and understanding of the paper. So be able to answer or elaborate on more on the paper. So, but I think as I heard what was said, it's more or less all what I know. And yeah, thank you very much for that. I really appreciate that.
Okay, maybe you'll come back later. But at this point, I'm gonna give to Professor Noor, and the chat option is also available if you don't want to say. So after Prof. Noor, Jenny, please go ahead after that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tokelo, and thanks to Sally as well as to William. I have two quick questions, comments. The first relates to the archive that William has been busy for some years in creating. And I think that what this paper does is to reveal to more of us the importance of this collection. And yet we face this crisis nationally about archiving the kind of work, the body of work of people like William, which speak powerfully and in this case very vividly to the everyday lives of Black people and working class people in particular. So I wonder if William and perhaps Sally also could speak to that process, the challenges in creating an archive, as well as the importance of it. I know that the other people on the Zoom link who are similarly involved in thinking about and for years being involved in creating photographic archives. It is a challenge. Then just to my second point, which is where Sally ended, about scholars, researchers attempting to bring to life the everyday experiences of poor working class people, but also people in the rural areas. This remains a challenge, and the question there, I suppose, is what role this kind of photography can play in illuminating and explaining those varied experiences that social history has attempted to do over a long time. And increasingly, I have to say that our students are turning to photography to try and understand those processes. And so I think it's an important intervention, and the insights by Sally, I think, add layers to our understanding in relation to that. Thank you.
Thanks. William, would you like to respond to that, or You're muted.
Yeah, there you are. Yeah, I think the question that No poses, or that I pick up quite well, is the challenges we're faced or still faced even now in building such an archive. It was, yes, difficult and still even difficult now to be able to get those images in some places in order to empower and keep on putting more work into the archive. But with love of work, like of what you do, relation you have with your work, it always pushes you above the limit given by the people you come across who block you when you have to do those kind of work. So, but consistent and passion that one has in doing this work, keep one going in keep on doing that. I'm just back from one of the work that I just did last week. Difficulties that you come across are always problematic and blocking you be able to get more work of the kind of workers at work. So, but yes, I mean, after 1994, we're supposed to be much easy in getting some of the work, especially in workplaces. But it become more difficult. I mean, nowadays it's completely stopped. You can't get some of the areas if you want to do the kind of work one should do. So it's very difficult nowadays, especially in some of the institutions that are supposed to be public institutions. It's not easy to get there. And in some factories, yes, there are factories that allow, some disallow, that kind of things. There are still problems to get those access. Yes, thank you. Oh, there was a question. I thought I want to read it, but
no, it's fine. That Matlala, I'll read
okay.
the question.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no,
I don't know if I don't know if there's anything you want to add, Sally, before I take Jenny and then read the questions in the chat.
Okay.
Just to say, I mean, thank you, Noah, for your question. The issue of archives is quite a complex one, just in the sense that there isn't an official apartheid archive, which I seem to sort of allude to, but I don't actually say in the paper. That there's just so many different archives that belong to people individually, that belong to collections, historical papers, for example, but there is not one unified archive. And Cedric, I see you're here. Hi, thanks for coming. Cedric might actually also be able to add something about archives. Also, how things are categorized in archives, I think is really crucial to the way in which we understand them and read them. So that, some of these images are in people's personal collections and some of them are in, trade union collections. So that kind of crossover, I think, problematizes that whole issue of the repository and where they're kept. Increasingly, images are taken digitally, and so the images are on Facebook, but they're not in collections. And Facebook, as we know, has gazillions of photographs uploaded to it every day, and the physical image no longer exists. And I think that's something that is a great loss to me as a photographer. As well, but that's just a few issues about archives and and the problems around them. Sorry, but it's a very incomplete answer, Noah.
Okay. At this point, I'm gonna give Jenny. She's been having her hand up for quite a while. And then I'm going to read a couple of questions in the chat Yeah, go for it.
I just wanted, I don't want to, I'm just a bit worried that my comment will take it off where the discussion has been going.
Please speak up.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, much better.
I don't want to take it off the direction of this discussion now, but I just wanted to share. I spent many years with William. I was working for NUMSA, and I often used to bring him in to take photographs of meetings and that. And I just remember that often he would be a very quiet person that would accompany me. And I was interviewing or talking or whatever, but afterwards sitting in the car going back home, he had picked up so many more things than I had. He'd noticed the empty classroom or the empty this or the something else that I hadn't noticed. And so his eyes that he had trained over the years of being a photographer had just noticed so much more than I had. And that really struck me as why his photographs are so valuable. I think they really pick up the nuances that often one can't write about. And I'm really sorry, I've got another meeting now, and so I have to leave just now, but I would really support some kind of a proper archiving of William's photographs. They are so extensive and so valuable in terms of recording our history. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny.
All right. So there's a question here from Matsidi. So she says, thanks, Sally, for the wonderful overview of your paper. One question, being aware that they were being photographed, do you think any of the workers intentionally performed for the camera or played any role in the making of the photographs, perhaps in contrast to an alternative outsider gaze perspective, where they would simply be watched or not necessarily have any agency on how they were seen or portrayed? So that's the first one. The second one is from Lebohang. She says, thank you, Ndate Matlala and Sally. Your story and your pictures are the story of my mother and father. As a child of those workers, of my impressions of the photographs are very important. How does one engage with this work, this archive beyond today? And then Kelly asked, can William comment on the time he was employed by COSATU? What was his role? How does he think his image advanced the worker struggle, and how were his image used, and how did workers relate to his image? Yeah, I'll pause there for now.
Okay. With regard to people being aware of a camera, I think, you know, in one respect, I think that people are, you know, whenever a camera appears, and particularly, I mean, in the past, I mean, I think, you know, we are continually being sort of watched by cameras and films and CCTVs, but I think that awareness that people have of being observed by a camera does change your behavior. You know, it's very interesting how you know, in these reality TV programs, sorry to bring in something as banal as that, but the presence of the camera is never really acknowledged. And, you know, you have to wonder, you know, how much people are performing for the camera. So yes, there is a degree of, and there might well be a degree of performance. But I think that William has sought to portray something very authentic, and whether people were aware of the camera or not, I think they are still able to be themselves. And I think that is something that is really quite powerful about his photographs. Family, I really loved what you said about it being your own family story. And I think that when William exhibited at the Apartheid Museum, a lot of people said, you know, it's my story as well. So that, you know, I think that although it's a very particular and personal archive, it has resonances beyond what it depicts. And, you know, and that's also a kind of an amazing thing. You know, if you've got family photographs, sorry, I don't see your name. Is it Lebogang? If you've got family photographs, you know, keep them and look at them, and ask your family members about them, because I think that you start, you know, unpacking your own personal history in, you know, in extraordinary ways. And then, yeah, I don't know about, you know, how to where William's archive should be deposited, but certainly there should be a South African archive, like like in America they have the Library of Congress, and the Farm Security Administration photographs from the 1930s are kept there. You know, I think that there's a great need to preserve these images. And you know, what upsets me is that today there are very few photographers working in this genre and this mode. And so the kinds of the everyday images, I mean, maybe they are on Facebook. I don't know. I don't really do Facebook, but you know, these photographers went out in the 80s and the 90s, and they were quite serious about their craft, and I don't see that today. But there again, maybe Cedric, you know, could comment on that.
Okay, and Tati William, Kelly asked if you could comment on the time you were employed in COSATU, and what your role was, and how
Yes.
the image helped portray worker struggle.
Yes, no, thank you. You know, I first want to thanks to Jenny, the special character that she mentioned about me observing things that she did. Yes, we did work, and I also thank her very much, because she is one of the people who helped me a lot in order to have access in some of the factories, because she was employed at NUMSA, and then I couldn't get in through without having someone from the union so that one can be able to take photograph. It was great time, and I really appreciate that help that she gave when I have access to some of the factories in the steel company. Yeah, I mean, the question of archive building, I mean, there are quite a lot of archives that are now, some have already established, some are in the process of being established. So people are start working on that. I think it will be very nice to have variety of archives of different photographs and photographers in the country. I mean, it can't be kept in one place and say that's where it goes, because we see lots of archives that were established by the previous government. You don't know where they are now. When you go there, it's just a disaster. So to have different archive of different kind of work, it would be very nice if that can just kept that way. And I really appreciate some of the photographers are building that kind of things, and I really appreciate that. And I hope one will be able to work closely with them and find out how they work, how to be involved with them, and keep the work there that can be safe. Yeah. Taking Haley's question, the time, I think I was employed at COSATU in 1989 as a photographer. And I came to COSATU with the experience of working with workers, because in Trimpec, I was employed, I was taking photographs of workers at work and workers outside the factory at their families. And that made me be able to talk to them communicate with them, and being part or one of them was much easy to infiltrate into getting access or photographs of them. And coming to COSATU, you know, I mean, when I remember when I come to COSATU, some members of COSATU already start calling me comrade from Food and Allied Workers Union, which I was a member. So in that way, it gave me simple access to be able to take photograph of workers at work and in their trade union movement. And when I mean, in COSATU, then one start getting much understanding, much relationship, close working relation with officials, with workers. So it was quite experience to work at COSATU, and also helped me a lot. Even now, I mean, one can say I'm still using some of those contacts, though the rest or all of those workers who were working at that time, they retired, some they gone on pension, some in government or wherever they are. But it helped me a lot. And I used that relationship quite well, and I still want and still use it even now, some of the words about that. And greetings to Cedric. It's one of my best teacher in the beginning of photography. Cedric, how are you there, my friend? Yeah. So
well,
it's nice to see you there, man. Yeah.
Well, in that note, I think it's only Cedric's hand that's up. We still have a couple of more minutes to take more questions. So you can either do that in the chat or raise your hand. Cedric, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
So, hey, hello, bra comrade Willie. Good to see this meeting around your work. It's very important, and thank you to Sally and the team who have put this together. It's gratifying to see that Willie's work is continuing to be given the attention it deserves. And obviously much more needs to be done. And I think that the big job that you've all spoken about quite a bit that needs to be engaged with, obviously, is the archiving of this work, because if it's not done in a comprehensive way, we lose huge critical aspects of it. And archiving is really continues to be the major issue that we face with our collective history. You know, we've spoken about you know, people have spoken about you know, that they see themselves in Willie's images as you know, they relate to it even in an intimate way, where they, you know, we use the word family. And I use that word as well, because I consider myself and the kind of work that Willie, as a colleague of Willie's, the kind of work that we do as almost, we were the South African family photographers. We photograph for the South African family. And that work, while we own it personally, is really the collectively owned as well by South Africa. And unfortunately, even though there are quite a few archiving initiatives, they all have their own particular obstacles. And I'm sure Willie has faced that as well. You know, that ultimately each person who has an archive, and Willie certainly has an archive, is left with the sense that it's their entire responsibility to present the work as an archive in a way that it's accessible and useful, you know, in a way that it can be accessed certainly by South Africans and why not in the digital age globally. That's a huge undertaking to allow to leave to individuals, or the few archiving initiatives, all of them seriously underfunded, without the capacity to engage at the level that they need to. And we've been speaking about archives now consciously for the last 20 years, 30 years, really. The archiving has been this big issue, but there has been no comprehensive response to it at this point. So it really is the major issue. And it's really at the level at which it cannot be left to commercial, the market, so to speak, to deal with it. The few institutions simply just don't have the resources that they are. We need more. There are more initiatives. At this point, we have this sort of piecemeal approach to engaging with this big elephant of the archive. But it's highly problematic. There are so many people, we're all at the age now where we sense our mortality of if we pass on, our archives are completely incomplete, and they're not, because it's left to the individual, not left in a state where they can easily move into a state of being curated with the level of attention that they need. So the obvious thing is that this should be embraced by the state, and the state simply has not stepped up to the plate in terms of dealing with the issue, and it's at the point of crisis now. I mean, I've started an archiving initiative which faces its own issues around primarily just around organization and funding, because we are also in a place now with photography. Sally was lamenting that there are so few photographers working in the way that we worked in the 80s and 90s today, even though paradoxically there is this plethora of image making, but it's not being engaged with in a way that locates it within the archive. Facebook is no archive. Facebook is a commercial, market-driven enterprise where that work could disappear in an instant, actually. It's completely unsustainable. And it should not be left for in such hands ever. So we need a conscious approach to, an absolute curation. There are incredible photographers being produced who can work in this way, but there is no, because everything is left to the market, and the bottom has dropped out of the market. So the market is classically, capitalism fails to provide where it should, where the need is the greatest, actually. So this is these kind of archives are facing that serious problem. I've spent a year archiving. Just that's all I've done, sitting at this desk archiving, and I've done like 15,000 images, but they're not. I can see myself spending another 10 years not photographing, just to digitize the negative archive that I have. If it's going to be done properly, that's what it's going to take from me, without any income. There's no support for that kind of work. So it's a few people can do that, and it's a national crisis that's unrecognized. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Ali.
Thank you, William, for the work you've
Thanks,
done.
Ali. Thanks, my friend. Thank
All
you.
right, sure. I'm gonna take Ntai. I just saw a question from Gino, saying given that there's William's brilliant contribution to documenting workers' history then, and how does he feel about the state of the labor movement today? So, and then after that, I'll give to Ntai, and then we'll get responses, and then we'll gauge if there's still more discussions. Go for it, Ntai.
I just first want to acknowledge William Matlala. He's from my clan in Limpopo, Kitantahani. I acknowledge him on the basis that I've been in the trade union movement as a young boy at the age of 21, and I've followed Ndate Matlala's work through and through up until I started working at Pop Crew and later working at COSATU in the communications department. Mngoni, you have done a wonderful job, and I'm happy that COSATU at some stage was able to award you in terms of the contributions that you have done, in terms of keeping institutional memory of class struggles in South Africa, but more importantly, the broader working class communities. I've got only 2 comments. The first comment is that Matlala, I'm crying in my heart on how are we going to be able to secure some of the work that we have done. I'm happy that you took a personal decision to collaborate with institutions of higher learning like AboVets and others. But with the threats of banning of these libraries and other institutions, I think the work of Ndate Matlala might be lost. So I think there has to be a model in which such work can be preserved. I will be happy in my life if I can just walk into a door written Ndate Matlala exhibition center in one village where he comes from, or in one municipality where he's staying. I think the Department of Arts and Culture is failing people like Ndate Matlala, who have been brilliant in archiving some of their work. And a lot of all this work has been lost because of a lack of management by some of the departments and municipalities. The second comment is the erosion of institutional memory. I think Ndate Matlala should take a conscious decision at some stage to release many editions. I've followed his work. I've got copies of Labor Bulletin in my office. Here's the copy I can show you now. A lot of them, I still keep them. But what I'm saying is that you get to lose some of the key contributors or key stakeholders or key influencers during that time. And when you go back and peruse some of the books that Ndate Matlala's work appears, you then begin to have a clearer picture on what has happened. I just want to say, Ndate Matlala, your work has not been ignored for quite a long time, and is the right time now to elevate such work, maybe to force it into all the institutions of higher learning. But I blame the Department of Higher Education, municipalities, who are not playing a catalytic role in terms of ensuring that such work is kept, is promoted into the history of class struggles in South Africa. Mkoni, na kiaoreta, I praise you for all your work that you have done over many years. Thanks. I'm Norman Mampane from COSATU Communications.
Momre.
Tobel.
Yeah, so if there are no hands, because I don't see any, I just would like to thank everyone and give it back to both Sally and Ndate Matlala to sort of as a closing, as your final remarks on the discussion. Sally, you can start.
All right. Well, I mean, just to say thank you for your very interesting questions, everybody. It's really been super working with William's photographs and with William, and to have this opportunity to talk about them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. First, yes, let me just thank everyone who came in. Some have seen my work, and I really appreciate that. And also thank you very much, Sally, for writing about my work, and hope it don't end there. It will continue, and maybe something happened that we can start showing more of that work happen. Yes, also comment to my friend Sedi. He's one of my teachers also, actually, I must mention that. We used to walk around in 90s in town. He teach me how to take photographs, and that's the best teacher. I mean, we developed from there, become good friends now. So thank you very much. And to Ntai, yes, I will appreciate if this kind of work can be saved or kept in the best way that even the grandkids can be able to see that, but not only of mine, but work of like Cedric Nunn and other photographers all over. I mean, some of them, they've been abandoned cameras, trying their luck into the state. They fail and they come back, they're trying to pick up the camera. It's so difficult. It's so difficult work. Oh, I've got a problem with interference with the voice here. Yeah, so it will be proper, but I don't know if you refer to state, which department or whatever, have they ever worked on one exhibition or one photographer in South Africa that they can just promote? I don't remember seeing one photographer, thousands of them I know, hundreds of them I know in South Africa that have get sponsored from the states, says, yes, we're going to state your exhibition in the state, whatever gallery, if they still have gallery. But I mean, I remember taking some labor bulletin at one of the gallery in town here at the street. They never had labor bulletin. I mean, that book has been established since 1970. They don't have a copy. Then I have to force those copies in there. But now seeing what is happening in Cape Town, I start worry whether those bulletins I took to that gallery will just end down one day. So we have a serious problem. We have very serious problem. But hope that things will happen. And yeah, some archive can be established in a way that some work like this one can be able to be saved for the future generations to come. I really appreciate this and thank you very much. Thanks to everybody and everyone. To Gino, I mean, yeah, he's one of my friends. We once worked together and yeah, thank you very much, my friend. But I can't tell you how do I feel about the state of trade union movement nowadays. It's just problem. So that I can't get into it, but I'll talk to you on the coffee. I'm on table of coffee when we're together. It's not something that I can just easily say that things are completely different. Very different. So yeah, thank you very much. Thanks everybody. I really appreciate this.
All right. Thanks, Sally, and thanks Ntate Matlala for gracing your presence. And thanks to all the participants. I guess this brings us to the end of the seminar series. This session will be recorded and will be available on the WITS History Workshop. And please be on the lookout for our other upcoming seminars. Thank you to you all. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Goni.
Hello.
Dai.
Rare. Wana khoshi ke khoshi.
Tobe.
Okay.